Sign it, or I'll destroy you financially. My father's voice cut through the boardroom like a blade. I stared at the document spread across the mahogany table, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. My stepmother, Victoria, pushed the papers closer to me, her manicured nails tapping impatiently against the wood. This is a kindness, Mary. Be grateful we're giving you anything at all. Behind them, my half-brother Kieran leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, watching me with that smug expression I'd learned to hate. The lawyer sat silent, avoiding my eyes. My father slammed his fist on the table.
Now, Mary.
Sign away your share of Holt Fabrications, or I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. The words blurred on the page as tears filled my eyes. I signed. The moment the ink dried, my father snatched the pen from my hand. You were never meant to lead this family. The room spun. I stood on trembling legs, grabbing my bag. As I reached the door, the lawyer's voice stopped me cold. Miss Holt, your access badge has already been deactivated. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. My name is Mary Holt, and that was the moment my family erased me. I drove home in a daze, my father's words echoing in my skull. The apartment felt too quiet when I walked in. I collapsed to my desk and opened my laptop, desperate for something to distract me from the humiliation burning through my chest. That's when I saw it. An email chain I'd been accidentally copied on months ago, buried in a folder I rarely checked. My stepmother's name at the top. I clicked it open. The messages were timestamped 3 months before today. Victoria to the lawyer, discussing timing. Kieran responding with suggestions about how to corner me. My father's reply made my blood run cold. She's too emotional and inexperienced. We'll remove her before she becomes a problem for the company's future. They had planned this. Every word, every moment in that boardroom had been choreographed. I scrolled through message after message, seeing how they'd strategized my removal like I was a business liability instead of family. My hands clenched into fists. They hadn't just decided to push me out. They had spent months plotting how to do it. I whispered to my empty apartment. They never intended for me to stay. I thought back to my birthday dinner 4 months earlier. We'd been at Rosewood, the expensive restaurant my father loved for impressing clients. He'd invited business partners, friends, and family. I remembered feeling hopeful that night. I'd prepared a presentation about expanding our manufacturing capacity into sustainable materials. When dessert arrived, I'd started explaining my ideas. My father cut me off mid-sentence. Mary, nobody wants to hear about your little environmental projects. The table went silent. Kieran laughed into his wine glass. Victoria touched my father's arm and said sweetly, "Dear, let her finish. It's adorable when she tries." The condescension stung worse than the interruption. But my father wasn't done. He stood, raising his glass. "I have an announcement. Kieran will begin shadowing me in all leadership decisions. It's time to prepare the next generation." My brother grinned while I sat frozen. My father had promised me that role for 3 years. After dinner, I'd gone to the restroom and heard Victoria's voice from around the corner. "Once we push her out, the company will finally be ours." I never told anyone what I'd heard that night. The memory took me back further, to when I was 16. I'd given a presentation at school about my future plans to inherit Holt Fabrications. My teacher had been impressed. She'd invited my parents to see it. My father came alone. Halfway through my presentation, he stood up and interrupted. "Mary, you're making assumptions about your future that aren't based in reality." My classmates stared. My teacher looked uncomfortable. He continued, his voice cold. "Don't assume you'll ever be ready to run a company like ours. It takes more than enthusiasm." I'd wanted to disappear. That night at dinner, he barely spoke to me. But he pulled Kieran aside and signed him up for a youth leadership program at the local business college. I watched through the doorway as they discussed Kieran's future. My father never once mentioned training me. He handed my brother a folder of materials and said, "This is how real leaders are built." I understood then, at 16 years old, that my father had already decided who would inherit his legacy. And it wasn't me. That was the night I realized I'd been fighting for a place that was never meant to be mine. 6 months before the betrayal, I lost my strongest ally. Mrs. Calder had worked at Holt Fabrications for 20 years. She'd mentored me since I was 14, teaching me about supply chains and vendor negotiations. She'd always said I had the instincts for leadership. Then one day, she resigned without warning. I found her packing her office, tears in her eyes. "Why are you leaving?" I asked. She hesitated, then closed the door. "Your stepmother gave me an ultimatum. Stop supporting your ideas, or she'd cut my department's funding." My chest tightened. "What?" Mrs. Calder's voice cracked. "She said I was encouraging you to have ambitions above your station. She threatened my team's jobs if I didn't step back." I felt sick. "I'm so sorry." She squeezed my hand. "Don't apologize. But Mary, you need to understand something. They're making room for someone else. This isn't about your abilities. It's about their plan." After she left, I sat in her empty office and cried. I'd lost more than a mentor that day. I'd lost proof that I wasn't crazy for thinking I belonged there. 2 months before everything collapsed, I'd presented a financial recovery plan at the quarterly board meeting. I'd spent weeks researching cost-cutting measures and new revenue streams. The numbers were solid. My presentation was clear. My father barely glanced at the document. "This is amateur work, Mary. You don't understand the real complexities of manufacturing finance." Kieran smirked from across the table. "She doesn't understand real numbers, Dad. This is embarrassing." I tried to defend my work, but my father cut me off. "We'll table this discussion. Clearly more analysis is needed." The meeting moved on. I gathered my papers, humiliated. 3 weeks later, Kieran presented at the next board meeting. I sat in disbelief as he laid out a plan nearly identical to mine, just reformatted with different graphs. The board applauded him. My father beamed with pride. This is the kind of strategic thinking we need. After the meeting, I confronted Kieran in the hallway. He shrugged. "You snooze, you lose, sis." That night, I started documenting everything. Every email, every presentation, every conversation. I didn't know why yet, but I knew I'd need evidence eventually. The day after I signed away my shares, everything moved fast. I arrived at my desk that morning to find my computer access denied. My company credit card was declined at lunch. When I called accounting, they told me my salary had been terminated effective immediately. I walked back to my office and found security waiting. "Miss Holt, we need you to gather your personal belongings." My father had ordered them to escort me out. I packed my few items into a cardboard box while coworkers pretended not to stare. Victoria appeared in the doorway, watching with satisfaction. When I reached for the small plant on my windowsill, the security guard stopped me. "That's company property, ma'am." I stared at him. "It's a plant." He shifted uncomfortably. "Orders are orders." I left it there. As I walked through the building one last time, people I'd worked with for years avoided my eyes. In the parking lot, I called HR for my car. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe someone could explain what was happening. The HR director's voice was cold. "You're no longer an employee here, Miss Holt. Your termination was processed yesterday." The line went dead. I sat in my car in the parking lot, unable to move. My hands gripped the steering wheel as sobs tore through my chest. People walked past, glancing at me with pity or curiosity. I couldn't breathe right. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built my identity around, was gone. My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Don't embarrass yourself. Move on gracefully." Something snapped inside me. I wiped my face and stared at those words until they blurred. Move on gracefully. As if I was the one who'd done something wrong. As if I was the one who should be ashamed. I typed back 3 words before I could stop myself. "Watch me." Then I deleted it and wrote something else instead. Understood. I hit send, started my car, and drove away from Holt Fabrications for what I thought might be the last time. But as I merged onto the highway, something shifted in my chest. The grief began hardening into something else. Something colder and clearer. I whispered to myself, "I'll show you, Graceful." And I meant it. 2 weeks later, I moved into a studio apartment across town. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The walls were thin enough to hear every neighbor's conversation. I owned almost nothing anymore. I'd sold my furniture to cover rent and bought an air mattress from a discount store. The place felt like giving up. But what hurt worse was discovering my father had blocked my access to my late mother's trust fund. She'd left it for me specifically, but it was managed through the company's legal team. When I called the law firm, they told me there was a dispute about the terms. My father was contesting my eligibility. I hung up and screamed into a pillow. He'd taken everything. My job, my legacy, my inheritance, even my mother's final gift to me. That night, I sat on my air mattress with my laptop and started researching. If I couldn't access my family's resources, I'd find another way. I searched for consulting firms that hired people without extensive experience. I made lists of companies, contact names, and email addresses. By dawn, I'd sent out 47 applications. I fell asleep as the sun rose, still wearing yesterday's clothes, my computer warm against my legs. My first consulting job was a disaster. A small bakery hired me to help with their failing business model. I had ideas, but no real experience implementing them. Everything I suggested seemed to make things worse. The owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Delgado, watched me struggle with patience. On my last day, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. When I came out, Mrs. Delgado was waiting with coffee. "You tried hard," she said gently. "That matters." I shook my head. "I failed you." She smiled. "You're better than you think, Mary. You just need to believe it." Her words stayed with me. The next morning, I applied to 3 more consulting positions. One responded within hours, asking for an interview. It was a slightly bigger firm, handling small business turnarounds. I prepped for 2 days straight. At the interview, I was honest about my limited experience but passionate about learning. They hired me on a trial basis. My first real paycheck was small, but I'd earned it myself. No family name, no connections. Just my work. I cashed the check and bought groceries without checking the prices. It felt like winning. 3 months into my new job, I met Liris Ocampo. She was a senior consultant at the firm, sharp and intimidating. She wore expensive suits and never wasted words. I was terrified of her. One day, she stopped by my cubicle. "You're Mary Holt." It wasn't a question. I nodded, confused. "You worked at Holt Fabrications." "Used to," I said carefully. She studied me for a long moment. "I worked with your father once. He offered me a senior position. I turned it down because I didn't trust his ethics." My breath caught. She continued, "You have potential. I'm going to teach you how to do this work properly, if you're willing to learn." Over the next 6 months, Liris became my mentor. She taught me real strategy, not the surface-level business theory I'd learned before. She was brutal in her feedback but fair. One evening, after I'd successfully completed a difficult analysis, she took me for coffee. "You're more like your father than you realize," she said. I froze. She smiled slightly. "Just not rotten. You have his strategic mind without his cruelty. Use it." That night, I realized something. My father's rejection had forced me to become stronger than I ever would have been under his wing. A year after leaving Holt Fabrications, I attended a networking event downtown. I stood awkwardly near the refreshment table, trying to look professional while feeling completely out of place. 2 executives stood near me, talking in low voices. They didn't notice me listening. "Holt Fabrications is in serious trouble," one said. His companion nodded. "I've seen the preliminary numbers. They're hemorrhaging money. My guess is they go under within 2 years." My heart stopped. "The leadership is incompetent," the first man continued. "The old man should have retired years ago. Now his son's running things into the ground." They moved away, still talking. I stood frozen, their words replaying in my mind. My family's company was failing. The business my father had sacrificed everything for, including me, was collapsing. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt sick. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my air mattress staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I'd heard. My father had pushed me out to protect the company, but he'd only accelerated its decline. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I wondered if he knew how bad things had gotten, or if his pride would let him see the truth even as everything fell apart around him. 6 months later, I landed my first major contract. A mid-sized distribution company hired me to help restructure their operations. It was the biggest project I'd handled alone. I worked 16-hour days, barely sleeping, fueled by coffee and determination. The analysis I delivered was thorough and actionable. 3 months after implementation, their efficiency had increased by 30%. The CEO sent me a glowing recommendation letter. Other companies started calling. My reputation was growing. Then my father called. I stared at his name on my phone screen for 3 rings before answering. "You're embarrassing this family," he said without greeting. "Using the Holt name to get consulting work is pathetic." I'd barely spoken to him in over a year. "I don't use your name. I use mine." "You're tarnishing our reputation," he snapped. "Stop this immediately." Something in me hardened. "No." "What did you say?" I said no. "I'm not stopping. I'm not embarrassed. And I'm done taking orders from you." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in months. It was the first time I'd ever refused him. The first time I'd chosen myself over his approval. That night, I celebrated with cheap wine and takeout, alone in my tiny apartment, finally free. 2 years after signing away my shares, I got access to confidential financial documents through a contact in the industry. They showed the truth about Holt Fabrications. The company was drowning in debt. Kieran had made catastrophic decisions, including an expansion into a market with no demand research. They'd borrowed heavily against their assets. Revenue was down 40% from 3 years ago. I read through page after page, my stomach twisting. Then I found something that made me stop breathing. Buried in an appendix was a familiar-looking proposal. My financial recovery plan. The one I'd presented 2 years ago. The one my father had dismissed as amateur work. According to the notes, a board member had suggested implementing it 6 months ago. My father had refused, calling it unnecessary. If they'd followed my plan, they could have saved themselves. The numbers were right there, showing exactly how my recommendations would have prevented most of their current crisis. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark. Part of me wanted to send the plan to my father to help somehow, but I didn't. He'd made his choice when he forced me out. Now he could live with the consequences. I was exhausted. 2 years of constant work, of proving myself over and over, of surviving on minimal sleep and maximum anxiety. One night, I broke down completely. I sat on my apartment floor at 2 in the morning, crying so hard I couldn't catch my breath. I was tired of fighting, tired of being alone, tired of carrying the weight of my father's rejection every single day. Maybe I should just walk away from consulting, from business, from anything connected to that world. Maybe I should start completely over somewhere else. As I sat there contemplating giving up, my laptop chimed with an email. I almost ignored it. Instead, I wiped my eyes and opened it. The sender was a company called Stratwell Acquisition Partners. They'd seen my work and wanted to discuss a consulting position. I clicked on their website. Stratwell specialized in acquiring struggling mid-sized companies and restructuring them. They were looking for someone with my specific skill set. The salary they mentioned was more than I'd ever made. I read the email 3 times. Then I wrote back, "I'm interested in learning more." The next morning, they called to schedule an interview. Maybe I wasn't done fighting after all. The Stratwell interview was unlike anything I'd experienced. 3 partners sat across from me in a modern conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. They asked tough questions about my background, my skills, and why I'd left Holt Fabrications. I was honest. I told them about being forced out, about rebuilding from nothing, about learning the hard way how companies fail when pride overtakes strategy. The lead partner, a woman named Sienna Ortiz, leaned forward. "What if we ask you to analyze your family's company?" My heart raced. I'd do it objectively, even if it meant they'd lose the business. I met her eyes. If the analysis shows they deserve to lose it, yes. Sienna smiled. They offered me the consulting position on the spot. But they offered something else too. A chance to invest as a silent partner in Stratwell. It would take most of my savings, but I'd own a small percentage of the firm. I'd be part of the decision-making process. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds.
Yes.
I'm in.
We shook hands.
As I left the building, I felt something I hadn't felt in years.
Power.
Not over others, but over my own life. My own future. Finally. On my second day at Stratwell, Sienna called me into her office. We're reviewing potential acquisitions. I want your input. She handed me a folder containing profiles of 6 struggling companies. I opened it and started reading. Manufacturing, distribution,
Production.
all in financial trouble. All potential targets. I turned to the 3rd page and froze. Holt Fabrications. Every detail was there. Revenue decline, debt levels, management issues, projected timeline to bankruptcy. It was all laid out in charts and graphs that told the story of my family's failure. Sienna watched my face. Can you handle this case objectively?
My mouth was dry. Part of me wanted to run.
Another part, the part that had been building for 2 years, wanted to see this through. Yes, I said. I can handle it. She nodded. Good. Because based on preliminary analysis, they're a strong candidate for acquisition. I need you to do a deep dive into their financials and operations. Give me a complete picture of what we'd be buying. I took the folder back to my desk. That night, I stayed late, reviewing every document about my father's failing company. It hurt more than I'd expected, but I kept working anyway. The analysis took 3 weeks. I requested internal documents through official channels. The company had to provide them as part of the acquisition review process. Nobody at Holt Fabrications knew I was the one requesting the information. I reviewed profit and loss statements, employee records, client contracts, and vendor agreements. Every piece of data painted the same picture. Total mismanagement. Kieran had made impulsive decisions without research. My father had let pride override common sense. Victoria had spent company funds on personal luxuries disguised as business expenses. But what hurt most was finding evidence of deliberate fraud. My father had been falsifying minor financial reports to hide losses from the board. Nothing massive, but enough to mask how bad things had gotten. He'd been lying to everyone. When I presented my findings to Sienna and the other partners, I kept my voice steady. This company will collapse within 18 months if nothing changes. The debt is unsustainable. The leadership is incompetent. And there's evidence of financial impropriety that could become a legal issue. Sienna studied my report. Recommendation: acquire it. Restructure completely. Replace all current leadership. She smiled. That's what I wanted to hear. Stratwell scheduled a site visit to Holt Fabrications. Standard procedure for potential acquisitions. I knew I'd have to face my family, but I didn't realize how much it would hurt. We arrived at 10 in the morning. My father, Victoria, and Kieran waited in the conference room. When I walked in behind Sienna and the team, my father's face went white. Victoria's mouth fell open. Kieran actually took a step back. What is she doing here? My father demanded. Sienna's voice was ice. Miss Holt is our lead analyst on this acquisition. Do you have a problem with that? My father's jaw worked, but he said nothing. The tour was painful. I walked through the factory I'd grown up visiting, seeing all the ways it had deteriorated. Equipment that should have been replaced. Safety violations. Demoralized workers. I took notes professionally, keeping my expression neutral. No emotion. No revenge. Just facts. After the tour, my father grabbed my arm in the hallway. You did this. I pulled away.
No.
You did this when you chose pride over competence. I'll fight this acquisition, he hissed. I met his eyes. Then fight. It won't change the outcome. I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway of his dying company. After our visit, everything at Holt Fabrications exploded. Word spread that Stratwell was considering an acquisition. My father tried to rally the board, but half of them were already looking for exits. Kieran panicked and started blaming everyone except himself. He accused my father of poor oversight. My father accused Kieran of incompetent execution. Victoria, seeing the empire crumbling, threatened to divorce my father and take her settlement before the company went completely bankrupt. Their fights became legendary among the staff. Screaming matches in the hallway. Accusations flying during board meetings. The business my father had built through control and intimidation was tearing itself apart. 3 board members resigned. 2 key clients canceled contracts. Employee morale hit rock bottom. Through all of this, I received updates but stayed distant. Sienna kept me informed about the chaos. One afternoon, she called me into her office. One of their board members contacted me privately. He said the board will vote yes to the acquisition if we make an official offer. I felt something twist in my chest. Relief. Grief. Vindication. All at once. When? Next week. The acquisition date was set. My father's company would officially become Stratwell's property. And through my investment, I'd own a piece of it. The night before the acquisition vote, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and froze. My father stood in the hallway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I almost didn't open the door, but curiosity won. "What do you want?" I asked without inviting him in. He pushed past me anyway. "You have to stop this." "I can't stop it, and I wouldn't if I could." His face twisted. "I'm begging you, Mary. This company is my legacy. Your grandfather built it. I expanded it. It's our family's history. You made it very clear I'm not part of this family." He flinched. Then his expression hardened. "If you go through with this, I'll destroy your reputation. I'll make sure everyone knows you sabotaged your own family." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Go ahead. Tell everyone how your daughter became so successful that she helped acquire your failing company. I'm sure that'll make you look great." He stared at me, desperation mixing with rage. Finally, he said something that made everything click into place. "I never thought you'd make anything of yourself." There it was. The truth he'd always believed. "I know," I said quietly. "Tomorrow will happen with or without your dignity. Your choice." He left without another word. The board meeting was held at 10 in the morning. I wasn't in the room, but Sienna called me immediately afterward. They voted yes. Stratwell now owns Holt Fabrications. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. It was done. The company my father had chosen over me was no longer his. Through my investment in Stratwell, I owned a percentage of it now. Not much, but enough to have a voice in decisions. Enough to be part of the restructuring team. Enough to matter. That afternoon, Stratwell held a meeting with Holt Fabrications leadership. I attended this time. My father sat at the table, his face gray. Victoria beside him, tight-lipped. Kieran slumped in his chair, defeated. Sienna outlined the restructuring plan. Victoria would lose her executive perks. Kieran would be demoted to a junior position with no decision-making authority. My father would lose all voting power and operational control. He could stay as a figurehead consultant if he chose, but the company would be run by new leadership. When the meeting ended, my father looked across the table at me. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He understood now. He answered to me, indirectly, through the company that owned his legacy. Outside, I breathed in the cold air and smiled. The next few weeks were chaos at Holt Fabrications. Victoria moved out of the executive office she'd decorated at company expense. She and my father separated, just as she'd threatened. She took a generous divorce settlement and disappeared. Kieran was reassigned to a junior analyst position. Most days, he didn't even show up to work. He'd gone from golden child to a relevant employee in a matter of weeks. My father tried to maintain dignity, but everyone knew the truth. His power was gone. The company he'd controlled through fear and manipulation was no longer his to control. The most surprising thing was how the employees reacted. Within days of the acquisition, I started hearing from Stratwell's HR team. Workers were celebrating. They'd hated my family's leadership. The environment had been toxic, raises were non-existent, and innovation was punished. Under new management, they finally felt heard. One afternoon, as I reviewed restructuring plans at Stratwell's office, Sienna mentioned something interesting. Your father showed up this morning. Security had to escort him out. He was trying to give orders to staff. I felt a pang of something. Not quite pity, but close. What will you do? Nothing. He can visit as a consultant if he wants. But he has no authority there anymore. That afternoon, I drove past Holt Fabrications and saw my father in the parking lot, standing by his car, staring at the building he'd lost. I kept driving. 2 months after the acquisition, Sienna called me into her office. We need someone to lead the restructuring team for Holt Fabrications. Someone who understands the company's history, but isn't attached to its dysfunction. My heart started racing. You want me to do it? You're the obvious choice. You know the business. You've proven you can be objective. And honestly, you've earned this. I accepted. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company that had forced me out now needed me to save it. My first day back at Holt Fabrications felt surreal. I walked through the entrance I'd been escorted out of 3 years ago. This time, the receptionist smiled and said, "Welcome back, Miss Holt." Employees lined up to introduce themselves. They shook my hand and thanked me for the changes Stratwell was making. For the first time in my life, I felt respected there. That afternoon, I passed my father in the hallway. He was leaving after his consulting session. We stopped, facing each other. "Congratulations," he said finally. His voice was hollow. "Thank you." He hesitated, then said, "I was wrong about you." I nodded.
Yes.
You were. He walked away. Through the window, I watched him get into his car and drive away. He looked small somehow, diminished. Not the towering figure who'd controlled my life for so long, just a man who'd made terrible choices and lost everything. 6 months later, I walked through the factory during a routine inspection. The space had transformed. New equipment hummed efficiently. Safety violations were corrected. Workers moved with purpose instead of fear. The numbers were already improving. Revenue was stabilizing. Debt was being restructured. The company was going to survive, not because of my father's leadership, but despite it. Sienna joined me on the factory floor. "You did this," she said. "You saved this place." I shook my head. "We saved it. You gave me the chance." "You earned the chance." She paused, then smiled. "The partners want to talk to you about a promotion. Junior partner, if you're interested." I was interested. Very interested. Outside, I saw my father's car parked at the perimeter fence. He did this sometimes now, just sat and watched. No access. No power. No say in what happened inside. Just watching the daughter he'd thrown away become the leader she was always meant to be. I stood at the window, watching him watch me. I didn't feel anger anymore. Or vindication. Just peace. He'd tried to erase me. Instead, he'd freed me. I turned away from the window and walked back to work. I didn't destroy him. I just stopped letting him destroy me. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What does family mean to you? Please share below and subscribe to this channel for more stories like mine.